Hello YouTube, Dave here again. It's a windy, rainy day here in Nova Scotia, and I thought that this would be a perfect opportunity to talk about the second installment of the Shackled City Adventure Path, entitled, ironically enough, Flood Season. So I was initially going to do like a grouping of 3 adventures together for the next couple of days, but honestly, trying to read through all 3 adventures to refresh my memory enough to the point where I feel comfortable talking about them while taking care of children, preparing meals, household stuff. It's just a little bit too much. So I think what I'm going to do instead is just look at each adventure on its own. And just kind of spread it out over the course of, do 11 straight videos on this, just one every day. Try to keep it a little bit shorter than, the one from yesterday where I had a lot that I wanted to talk about as far as the first adventure goes. So anyway, without further ado, let's have a closer look at Flood Season. So Flood Season made its appearance in Dungeon Magazine issue number 98, so it's the very next issue after the one with Life's Bazaar. This was also the first of the Dungeon Magazine issues to go on a monthly format. And this would impact the campaign path as well, because at this point in time they were still sharing space with the Polyhedron RPGA magazine. So each month they would sort of split the magazine 60-40. So the first month that they did it, Dungeon Magazine had 60 pages to work with, and therefore they would have the adventure paths, whereas on the subsequent months they would only have 40 pages, and at that point in time they were dedicating it usually to just one massive adventure. So the premise of this adventure takes place at the beginning of what we would call winter in the region of Cauldron, which is a tropical or subtropical region. So rather than getting snow like we would get, they get just basically heavy rains, and that's referred to as the flood season. The flood season, it kind of takes on sort of an unusual connotation with the citizens of Cauldron. And for them, it's the start usually of a time to celebrate. There's actually the Flood Festival that takes place around the time that the rains start. And it's sort of a way for everyone to just basically celebrate and enjoy themselves. During this time, they have games set up, there's competitions that they can do. There's a lot of just really fun stuff. And if you're going to run this adventure, my recommendation would be to let the player characters have some fun before getting into the serious stuff. Let them enjoy their time. This adventure does take place sometime after the events of Life's Bazaar, so things have kind of returned back to normal as it is, so why not let the players have a little bit of fun. However, eventually that's going to have to be broken up, as the acting high priestess of the Temple of St. Cuthbert sends an urgent summons to the player characters. So what happens around the flood season is, in the past, and where Cauldron is literally built into the bowl of a volcano, floodwaters can be a serious problem. A few decades ago, there was some serious flooding issues which required the high priests of each of the religions, being St. Cuthbert, Cord, Weejoss, and St. Cuthbert, Cord, Weejoss, Palor. Palor is the other one. So it required them to all come together and create several wands of control water just to keep the floodwaters at bay. Over the last few years, the flood seasons actually have been pretty mild, to the point where the priests no longer create the wands. They simply go to a nearby city to pick them up. And generally just one of the priests will go and do this. This year, the priest going to the city of Cesarine to pick up the 8 wands of control water that they suspect they'll need for the flood season falls on the shoulders of Sacrum, who is the high priest of St. Cuthbert. So Genia summons the PCs because she received a sending spell from him, stating that he was under attack and staying at a roadside inn known as the Lucky Monkey, which is about a day's travel away. And while she was trying to respond back to Sacrum, Genia's opportunity was cut off, which usually means something bad. So she sends the PCs there to ascertain what's happened and to hopefully save Sacrum and recover the wands of control water. The player characters are able to travel on, by mount, so that gets them there in about half the time. However, by the time they get there, it's too late. The roadside inn has been ransacked by a group of bandits known as the Alley Bashers. The Alley Bashers are also led by a were-baboon by the name of Tongue Eater. And you can see the were-baboon there. By the time the player characters arrive, the High Priest of St. Cuthbert Sacrum has already been murdered and decapitated. And, his head is essentially missing, so that resurrection just wouldn't be possible at this point in time. So the player characters, however, they are able to defeat Tongue Eater. They recover the priest's body, but they notice that all the Wands of Control Water are missing. While they're exploring the roadside inn, they can also come across a badly beaten half-drow bard druid monk combination by the name of Shensen Tesserel. She's another member of the organization, the Striders of Farlangan, who the player characters could have interacted with in Life's Bazaar, and who could have potentially adventured with them throughout the dungeons. So she is pretty badly beat up. However, she does say that, if they do rescue her, she does mention that the were-baboon Tongue Eater seemed to have been taking orders from a red-headed woman who took all the Wands of Control Water. The next part of the adventure has the player characters trying to discern who that red-headed woman is. And they have various ways of finding the information. They can speak with Genia, who is now the new High Priestess of St. Cuthbert, and she has access to a relic that can allow her to cast divination once per day, or once per week, sorry, and that item is known as the Star of Justice, which is a +1 heavy mace. So some of the information that she gets from that can kind of steer them in the right direction. However, if their avenues of exploration, like interrogating prisoners using the divination magic, or traveling around to other locations and just seeing if anybody knows who she is, fails, the player characters can be contacted by an informant by the name of Artis Shemwick. Now, Artis works for the Last Laugh Thieves Guild that the player characters interacted with at the beginning of Life's Bazaar. The Last Laugh Thieves Guild and the Alley Bashers are at competition with one another, and quite frankly, the Last Laugh takes exception to the fact that the Alley Bashers helped steal the Wands of Control Water that's going to keep the city of Cauldron safe. And without, if Cauldron, suffers heavy damage or gets destroyed, then they're not going to have as much stuff to steal that's going to be worth any value. So they, in a roundabout way, can assist the PCs. The information that they are able to provide is that the red-headed woman goes by the name of Triel, and she is a former member of the Town Watch. However, she became disgraced when she murdered one of her fellow guards, and then she went into hiding. She bears a personal grudge against the city of Cauldron and took the wands as a way of getting back at them. There's a bit more to it than that, of course, as well, and we'll get into that in a moment. Artis does know that she is currently hiding out in a series of underground ruins beneath the city of Cauldron known as the Copperu Ruins, and can provide information on how to reach that location. So there's a series of lava tubes and hidden entrances that the Last Laugh Thieves Guild is aware of, and that leads to this particular dungeon here, which still has quite a few rooms. It's 56 rooms, but this is a singular adventure. The Lucky Monkey also had quite a few rooms, but went by a little bit faster, and I'll talk sort of about that at the end of the adventure. So hidden in the Copperu Ruins, Triel isn't there by herself. In her time, since she became a disgraced member of the City Watch and exiled herself, she became involved with an organization known as the Cult of the Ebon Triad. Now, the Ebon Triad is a really cool organization, and they're one that I actually like quite a bit. They don't factor in too much into this particular campaign path, but they do feature very heavily in the next one. The Ebon Triad is an order made up of heretical worshippers of Vecna, Erythnol, and Hextor. And their belief is that all three of those gods were once part of a greater divine overbeing. And they're trying to have the divine energies of those individual gods reconciled back into one. So Triel has become a priestess of Hextor. In addition to have equal representation, there is a member of, a worshipper of Vecna as well as a worshipper of Erythnol. The worshipper of Vecna is a halfling diviner by the name of Skaven, this little guy here, and the worshipper of Erythnol is a gnoll by the name of Tarkalar, and Tarkalar tried to turn himself into something equivalent to a lich. However, the ritual that he underwent failed, and he transformed himself into a Hukiva instead. And for those of you who aren't aware, a Hukiva is basically an undead that comes about as these sorts of errors take place, trying to create some other type of undead. They still retain much of their divine powers, so he would still have the ability to cast spells and do other things, but his intelligence is greatly reduced to the point where the other members of the cult are now concerned or even fearful of him, and they lock him away. So throughout the exploration of the Copper Ruins, the player characters can confront these members of the Ebon Triad. The Ebon Triad also serves as something of a red herring for the rest of the adventure, as you know, it's possible that the players may conclude that this cult is behind everything that's happening. The goal of the Ebon Triad in stealing these wands of control water was to essentially wait until the flood started to cause heavy damage and then ransom them back so that they can fuel their further research. However, the player characters can intervene and recover the wands as they go through the dungeon. Now, the player characters don't necessarily have to collect each and every single one of the wands in order to be considered successful in stopping the flood damages. So if the player characters do end up missing a room or two, or, you know, failing a search check to find where one of these is hidden, it doesn't mean that the city is doomed. It may cause a little bit more damage, but at the end of the day, as long as they're able to recover the majority of the wands, then the mission would be considered successful, and the player characters become heroes that saved the city of Cauldron from the floodwaters. And that's basically how the adventure concludes. And, you know, this is a perfect opportunity, again, to let them enjoy their time as heroes. So that was Flood Season. So just basically to quickly recap, the city is undergoing its regular, flooding season. The rains start to be a little bit more intense than other years previous. The high priest who was sent to purchase wands to control water to keep the waters from causing any damage was ambushed and murdered, as well as the wands taken by a group of cultists looking to ransom them back later on. The player characters are able to defeat the ambushers at the roadside inn, but they are too late to get there, and unfortunately they can't prevent the high priest from being killed. The new high priestess of St. Cuthbert then sends the player characters after the wands to control water. If need be, they can form an alliance with an informant from the Last Laugh Thieves Guild, although they probably don't know that he's from the Last Laugh Thieves Guild, but someone who can become a very important source of information later on in the campaign. He leads them, or their investigations lead them, to a series of underground ruins known as the Copper Ruins, where they can investigate, clear out the cultists, and retrieve the wands of control water. So there you go. That is a Flood Season. So what are my thoughts on this particular chapter? Alright, so that was my look at Flood Season, the second installment of the Shackled City campaign path. So honestly, how do I feel about this one? I like this one a lot more than Life's Bazaar. Now, Life's Bazaar was a good adventure, but it did suffer from a lot of bloat. There was stuff in it that just didn't need to be there, including a 63-room dungeon that ultimately served no purpose for the adventure or the story of the campaign. Now, the Flood Season locations do have quite a few rooms to them, and you're still looking at, you know, a 50-plus room ruins where you can recover the wands of control water, as well as, I think there was like 30 or, there's 30 some odd rooms descriptions in the Lucky Monkey. However, each of those adventure locations are important to the story and drive the narrative forward. So having a lot of places to explore, even though there's a lot of rooms, but nothing in this adventure is superfluous to what's going on in the adventure itself. Unlike Zitterune, which was just this big 63-room nothing that didn't need to be there, but the players still felt compelled to search through because they were looking for kidnapped townsfolk. In this situation, they're only going to be going to a place where they think these wands of control water are. So I think just from that perspective alone, even though, again, you're getting into a lot of rooms and a lot of, sort of a big dungeon crawl type of environment, I still think that overall it feels like less of a slog, because at the end of the day, nothing that you do is sort of unimportant or unrelated to what's going on in this particular story. As far as its impact on the overall narrative of the Shackled City campaign path, This is really sort of a sidetrack. This isn't really related to the overall story that's going on. Now, I'm not going to talk about the overall story yet. I'm actually going to save that for the moment in the campaign where the player characters get the chance to finally discover what's going on. And so that's still going to be quite a ways away. So this was, again, an excellent chapter. I loved the idea behind the cult of the Ebon Triad. And even if the second adventure path that Paizo published after this one didn't feature them heavily, I was going to try to do something with them because I just thought they were such a cool concept. So I love that, having the Hukiva, this sort of failed attempt at creating a clerical version of a lich, I thought was great because, again, that's just another monster that I love. It's not the greatest undead in the world, but I still love that it was in here, and it was really, really cool. Also, Tarkalar, what I forget how to pronounce his name. The Hukiva, before he became a Hukiva, was experimenting by creating different types of undead, and he had some dwarven architects sort of build the location of the dungeon that he was in, and their reward was to be turned into spawns of Caius because he managed to get these 2 Caius worms and infect them. So the player characters can fight some spawns of Caius in here. Now that doesn't really mean anything for this adventure path, and I don't think they necessarily had the second one already planned by the time that they printed the second adventure of the first one, at a point in time in which they still were not certain if this was going to be successful or not. But the second campaign path focuses very heavily on Caius and his various types of undead that he's created. So it's kind of interesting. It's almost a little bit of foreshadowing, even if it's unintentional. The other thing about this adventure that I really like is because it's not as directly connected to the main overarching storyline, it creates a greater sense that there's just more things going on than this one particular series of events. So it actually makes the player characters genuinely feel like they're actual heroes taking on a variety of tasks. So, which is something that is sort of missing from future adventure paths, which I'll talk more about when I get to them. So overall, if having a beholder appear at the end of the first adventure didn't make me want to run this campaign path, this adventure was the one that really made me want to run it. In fact, basically what I was just doing was waiting to get a couple more issues of the adventure itself, so that I wouldn't run into a situation where I completed a chapter and still had to wait a month or so in order to start the next part of the campaign. So this is, again, a really, really cool adventure. I like the concept, I like the idea, and again, it lets the player characters just have a little bit of fun at first before flipping the switch and having things get very, very serious. And this solidifies the player characters as heroes. I mean, if they weren't viewed that way after rescuing the orphans from the last adventure, then saving the entire city by recovering as many wands as they can would certainly do it. So this is a great adventure. It's a great addition to the Shackled City campaign path, and it again lets the player characters sort of expand and do things that aren't all just directly connected to this one plot thread that gets driven into the ground. So awesome adventure, really great concept, cool enemies. I really like this one. So this actually would even make a great adventure as a standalone, which is what these things were meant to do at this point in time. They were meant to serve as standalone adventures in the event that the campaign path didn't work so well. So if you're looking for an interesting adventure, then for characters of 4th level, then this would be a cool one to do. And there's a lot of great stuff in here. The only downside that I can really find with this adventure is that its level range, going from, I think, 4 and letting them gain 5th, I think, by the end, or even possibly 6th by the end. I think it's 5th, though, doesn't line up with the previous chapter. So Life's Bazaar took the player characters from levels 1 through 3, whereas this one starts them off at 4th level. So there's something missing in between, and if you were running the campaign path based solely off the magazines, then you had to do something to fill that gap in. Or you could have the player characters go slightly under-leveled into the encounters at the Lucky Monkey, maybe have a couple of random encounters along the way to hopefully boost their experience points up. But if you send them in under-leveled, the were-baboon that they face could very easily destroy the entire party. I mean, he is a very powerful villain. So one thing to keep in mind, if you are running these out of the magazine, find a way to get your player characters to 4th before you start this. And that's it. That's the only really negative thing that I can think about. It's just that it didn't line up seamlessly with the last one. Other than that, really great adventure. Probably one of my personal favorites throughout the entire storyline. So let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Have you run Flood Season, or have you played through this campaign path? What were your thoughts on this particular adventure? What are your thoughts on the Ebon Triad, if you've encountered them? So let me know in the comments below. Try to avoid any spoilers if for anyone who hasn't gone through these, so don't give away like the big secret of the Ebon Triad from the next campaign path. But, you know, just talk about some of the general stuff if you want. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.